Good evening, neighbors. It's Sunday, July 28th, 1946, here in Maple Falls. The sweet corn's coming in thick this week, and if your kitchen smells like vinegar and hot jars, you're not alone. Canning season is in full swing all across town. Tomatoes are right behind the corn, and every housewife I talk to is doing arithmetic against her ration book at the very same time she's watching that kettle boil. Down at the Legion Diamond, the boys keep giving us plenty to cheer about, and we'll get to that before we're through tonight. Tonight we've got a story from clear out in the Pacific that shook radio sets from coast to coast, grave news from the Holy Land, hard news out of Washington that touches every grocery bill in this town, a look at the rest of the world, the weather, the ball games, and the usual walk around our own square. So pull up a chair and let's settle in. Here's the week. We start in the Pacific at a lonely ring of coral called Bikini Atoll. Thursday morning out there, Wednesday evening our time on account of the dateline, the United States Navy set off the world's first underwater atomic explosion. They called it Teased Baker, and this time the bomb didn't hang from the belly of a plane the way the first one did back on the 4th of July. This time it hung 90 feet down in the lagoon itself, slung beneath an old landing ship called the LSM-60, right in the middle of a target fleet of some 90 vessels, old warships mostly, gathered there to take the blow so the Navy could learn what an atom bomb does to a fleet riding at anchor. And here's the part that still has folks talking around here, more than the science of it, if you want my honest opinion. The networks carried it live. For the first time in the history of this world, ordinary people sitting in their own front rooms, same as you're sitting in yours right now, heard an atomic bomb go off right there on the radio dial, same as you'd hear a ball game or a church service on a Sunday morning. I picture it the same as you do, I expect. Families gathered up close to the set after supper, the volume turned up a notch higher than usual, somebody's hand going quiet on the dial the moment the announcer's voice changed. A countdown came over the air, plain numbers, the kind you'd hear at any test range, and then a long stretch where nobody at home said a word, waiting on a sound none of us had ever heard before. Think on that a moment. No newsreel, no photograph in the paper the next day, just a voice on the air, counting down, and then a sound most of us have no word for. Vice Admiral Blandy had the watch out there aboard the command ship well clear of the lagoon, and the men who saw it happen said the water itself seemed to stand straight up on end. A column near a mile high, near 2,000 feet across at the top. Witnesses are saying it boiled up out of that lagoon like a cauliflower made of some 2 million tons of seawater, hanging there in the sky a long moment before it came back down and swallowed half the fleet in spray. They've taken to calling the shot Helen of Bikini. Its punch, the Navy tells us, was in the neighborhood of what leveled the city of Nagasaki. The old battleship Arkansas was moored close in, only 250 yards off, and she went down almost before the spray had cleared. Gone, witnesses say, in something close to an instant. The carrier Saratoga, which carried our boys through some hard years of this war in the Pacific, followed her to the bottom some 7.5 hours later, slower but just as sure. 10 ships in all went to the floor of that lagoon before the day was through, submarines included, the Apagon and the Pilotfish among them, twice what the first test cost the Navy back on the 4th of July when the bomb went off in the air instead of the water. And the captured Japanese battleship Nagato. She was Admiral Yamamoto's own flagship once, the one that carried the order for Pearl Harbor, is still afloat as of this evening, though she's listing hard in the water, and the Navy expects she won't stay up much longer. Inspection crews have been held off the ships closest to where that bomb went off for most of the week now, waiting on the radioactivity in the water and the spray to die down some before anybody will risk sending men aboard to look her over. It is a strange thing, neighbors, to sit in your own kitchen here in Ohio of an evening and listen to a bomb go off on the other side of the world. I don't believe any of us quite has the words yet for what that means going forward. I suspect the Navy is still working that out itself, same as the rest of us. But there it is, the loudest thing this country has ever put on the air, and every radio in America carried it, whether you tuned in on purpose or just happened to have the dial on. That was the spectacle of the week. Now, neighbors, for the graver news, and I'll ask you to bear with me while I give it to you straight and brief. Monday in Jerusalem, a bomb tore through the King David Hotel, which houses the British government offices there. More than 90 people are dead, British, Arab, and Jewish alike, with rescue crews digging through the wreckage for days afterward. Prime Minister Attlee condemned the bombing before Parliament as an act of terrorism, and Jewish leadership abroad has condemned it as well. It is a heavy loss, and our thoughts go out tonight to a part of the world that has seen far too little peace. Now, home to Washington, where the biggest story for the family pocketbook broke this past Thursday. President Truman signed the bill bringing back the Office of Price Administration 25 days after the old law lapsed and prices were left to run wherever the market would take them. He didn't pretend to love the bill. His own words read right off the wire. "I have signed this measure with reluctance." He said flatly that the bill fell far short of what he'd asked Congress for back in the spring, but he signed it late Thursday afternoon anyway, rather than leave the country with no ceilings at all going into the fall. Here's what snaps back, plain and simple, starting this past Thursday. Price ceilings on bread, sugar, coffee, and canned goods return to where they stood on June the 30th. And rents do too. If your landlord tacked a few dollars onto the rent sometime during those 25 days, the law says he's got to take it back off, as of Thursday. No arguing about it. Now meat, milk, butter, and eggs are a different story entirely. Those stay uncontrolled for the time being, while a new three-man price board gets itself organized down in Washington, members not yet named, so far as the wire tells us tonight. That board is expected to take up the whole question of meat sometime next month. Until then, the free market sets that price, same as it has these last few weeks, and you've felt it at the counter. The government's own figures show plainly why Congress felt the need to act at all. In those 25 days, without any ceiling whatsoever, prices on a broad basket of goods jumped better than 24%, the sharpest run-up the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it has ever recorded on the books. Food alone was climbing at a rate the Bureau called the greatest on record. Meat prices up around 30% in that short stretch, dairy up better than 20%. Now, it is not everything folks wanted, and prices are not falling clean back to where they stood in June across the board. The new law allows some higher markups than the old one did, but after 25 days of watching the grocery bill climb by the day, having any ceiling back at all is news worth having in this house or any other tonight. We'll get into just what all that means at Dot's counter in a few minutes when we walk through the kitchen table news proper. First, a quick trip around the rest of the world, because plenty else happened while Washington was sorting out its own bill. At Nuremberg on Friday, Chief American Prosecutor Robert Jackson stood up and closed out the case against the 22 major Nazi defendants still on trial there. His words, and I think they bear repeating in full. If they are innocent, then there has been no war, there are no slain, there has been no crime. The British followed with their own closing argument over Friday and into Saturday. A verdict from that tribunal isn't expected before early fall, so there is waiting yet to be done on that score. Tomorrow in Paris, 21 Allied nations open the peace conference at the Luxembourg Palace to draw up treaties at last for Italy, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Finland, the unfinished business left over from the fighting. Secretary of State Burns heads our delegation there, with Senators Connolly and Vandenberg standing alongside him, a Democrat and a Republican sent together, which tells you something about how this country wants that particular job handled. Word also reaches us from the United Nations up in New York, where the Soviet delegate, Mr. Gromyko, told the Atomic Energy Commission this week that his government finds the American plan for controlling the bomb unacceptable, whole or in any of its parts. And from Bombay comes word that the All India Muslim League Council is meeting there this week, under Mr. Jinnah, and is expected to withdraw its acceptance of the plan for India's future that the British and the Indian parties had worked out earlier this year. A step that could reshape the whole question of what becomes of that country. And out of Paris again, word that Gertrude Stein, the American writer who made her home there for near half a century, died Saturday at the age of 72 after surgery. She was a familiar name to anyone who followed the arts and a generous friend to plenty of our own boys who passed through Paris after the liberation. We'll keep an ear on all of it as the week ahead unfolds. Now the weather. Nationally, it was a week of real extremes, start to finish. Early on, soaking rains broke the weekend heat right along the eastern seaboard. Better than 2 inches fell on New York alone, and right about that same time, a freak little tornado tore through Concord, New Hampshire, of all places, killing a boy, hurting his father, and tearing a hole clean through the local armory. Kansas City hit a scorching 104 degrees on Tuesday, the hottest reading anywhere in the country's midsection this week, while Chicago stayed a good deal cooler the very same afternoon. Then a cool wave came down hard out of Canada and knocked the thermometer clean back within a couple of days. Up around the Great Lakes, some towns saw their coldest late July nights in a good many years. Better bring a blanket if you were sleeping with the window open up that way. Meanwhile, out in Texas and down in Arizona, the heat just kept right on building through the weekend, well over the 100 mark most every day, with no rain in sight anywhere on the horizon. As for right around here, warm and settled the next few evenings with maybe a chance of a shower by midweek. Nothing that ought to keep you off the porch after supper. Now let's talk about the kitchen table, because that's where this week's news really lands for most every one of us. I stopped by Dot's diner Thursday evening right about supper time, and Dot had already gotten out the chalk and gone to work on her board. She's not shy about the numbers, and she'll tell you so herself if you ask. The government's own survey has hamburger running better than 40 cents a pound in the cities now, 41 cents to be exact, up from 28 back in June, which is near half again what it was. Round steaks gone past 60 cents a pound, 61 cents and a bit, the survey says, against 42 back in June. Chuck roast is up over 43 cents, and butter's over 80 cents a pound now, which Dot says is the first time in her memory she's had to think twice about the price of butter. I stood there at the counter and watched her write the new hamburger figure in fresh chalk, and I'll admit I got turned around on which way she does it. I want to say she marked it in underneath the rest of the menu so nobody eating supper there could miss it. Meat and dairy are still riding free of any government ceiling, mind you. That's the piece Washington hasn't gotten to yet, and won't for another few weeks at least. But bread, flour, coffee, and sugar are back under the government's thumb as of Thursday, same as rents, which are rolled back now to where they stood on June the 30th. Dot tells me that every time a ceiling changes on her, she just marks the new figure in fresh chalk right above the old price, so there's no argument at the counter about which one's current. Bread's holding steady around 10.5 cents a loaf, and a 5-pound sack of flour is still about 35 cents. Those two barely budged the whole 25 days, which is small comfort, but comfort all the same. Sugar is still the one item in this house that wants a stamp along with your money. 1.5 pounds a week to a person, same as it's been right along. And with the tomatoes and the sweet corn coming in fast now, half the women in this town are doing arithmetic with their ration books in one hand and their canning kettles in the other, trying to stretch a stamp far enough to see the pantry shelf filled before frost. It isn't the easiest arithmetic anybody's ever had to do at a kitchen table, but it beats the alternative, which was no ceiling on anything at all, and watching the number climb a little higher every single time you walked into the store. On now to the ball games, starting with the big leagues. The Boston Red Sox are running away with the American League. 69 wins against 28 losses, a full 11 games clear of the Yankees, who stand at 57-38, with Detroit further back still at 14 games out. It isn't a question of if any more around that club, just when the flag gets nailed to the pole. Saturday afternoon in St. Louis, Boston's Rudy York put on a show for the ages, 2 Grand Slam home runs in the very same game off the very same pitcher, a fellow named Tex Shirley, and drove in 10 runs all told as the Red Sox routed the Browns 13-6. One of those slams cleared the fence and hit a light tower halfway up the bleachers in left field, and Ted Williams, who you'll recall hit for the cycle just last Sunday, reached base 6 separate times in that same ball game, if you can picture such an afternoon. Boston wrapped up its whole Western road trip 4 wins against 3 losses, finishing up this very afternoon in St. Louis with a doubleheader split. Out in the National League, it's a real dogfight worth staying up for. Brooklyn stands at 57-36, a game and a half ahead of St. Louis at 55-37, after the Dodgers took both ends of a doubleheader from Pittsburgh on Saturday by identical scores of 4-3. Sunday it flipped some. Brooklyn fell to Pittsburgh 7-3. While the Cardinals shut out the Braves 2-0. There is a great deal of season left to settle that one, and I wouldn't put money on it going quietly. Down in the Southwest, there was strange news at the track. Assault, this year's Triple Crown winner and the heavy favorite, finished dead last in Saturday's Arlington Classic. A horse called the Dude took the race instead. Nobody quite has an explanation yet for why the champion never fired. But the game that filled our own bleachers this week was right here at the Diamond, where Coach Burkett's Legion Millers keep right on chasing that district title. You'll remember young Pete Marsh driving in the winning run this past Tuesday with a clean single to left. Well, the boys backed that up again this week, and there's real talk now around town that this club might just do what no Maple Falls 9 has managed since back in 1941. Half that roster is kid brothers of the fellas who wore the uniform that year. Johnny Marsh has been out there most every evening himself, throwing batting practice to the very club his own kid brother plays for now, watching the whole thing from the first base side, same as the rest of us watch from the stands. There is something fitting about that, if you want my honest opinion, and I know I'm not the only one at that ballpark who's noticed it. And now, a walk around our own square. Down at the council chamber Tuesday night, the fairground barracks question came up again, Mayor Guthrie still pressing to open the old buildings for the veterans' families doubling up all over town, and a few of the square merchants still none too happy about the idea of it sitting so close to their storefronts. No vote yet. It's carried over again to next month's session, same as it was carried over the month before that. It's the very same story playing out in towns clear across this country right now, under what the papers are calling the Wyatt Housing Program. Lumber's scarce, builders are backed up a year or better, and here in Maple Falls it's just neighbors trying to find a roof to put over their own heads while the councilmen talk it through. Which brings me around to Johnny Marsh and Alice Purdy, who are no closer to solving that very problem for themselves. I came across the two of them Wednesday afternoon out front of Hollis Hardware, on Johnny's dinner break, with a folded newspaper page between them that turned out to be the classified column, the rooms to let notices circled here and there in pencil. Alice had her school satchel still over one shoulder, straight from Lincoln Elementary, and she was doing most of the reading out loud while Johnny leaned against the porch post and listened, arms crossed, the way a man does when he's already turned a thing over in his mind a dozen times. September and First Methodist are still the plan, far as I know, and Alice tells me the invitations are as good as settled. She's had her mother's good stationery set aside on the sideboard for 2 weeks now, waiting on the guest list to firm up. But the roof over their heads is another matter. They've looked at 2 rooms over on Elm Street and a spare upstairs at her aunt's place besides, and haven't settled on either one yet. The Elm Street place wants more rent than either of them is quite easy with, and the aunt's stairs, Johnny says with a grin, would take some getting used to at 6 in the morning. Alice folded that newspaper back up careful, the way you'd fold something you meant to look at again tomorrow, and tucked it into her satchel next to her lesson books. Johnny just shrugged and said they'd sort it, same as everybody else was sorting it. They've got good company in that worry, and they know it. Seems like half the young couples in this whole country are hunting the same thing this summer and coming up short in about the same places, month after month. Down at Drummond Tool and Die, the retooling from wartime shell fuses over to hand tools keeps moving along, week by week, machine by machine. Old man Drummond is still promising, same as he has all spring, that nobody loses their job over the change. Some of the men on the floor will tell you, quietly and over a cup of coffee, that they'll believe that the day the first shipment of finished tools actually rolls out the loading dock, and not 1 day sooner. It's an honest kind of doubt, born of a hard few years, and I don't fault a man for holding on to it. And over at the Courier office, Frank Kessler tells me Vera Hale's mother was in again this week with another clipping for the scrapbook she keeps of her daughter's doings. Seems our girl's latest record is already getting spun in the city clubs, and right here on this very station before it's even reached the shelf down at the 5 and Dime back home. There's a small paragraph on her in the Courier again this week, same corner it always runs, and I expect half this town reads it before they read anything else in the paper. We'll keep you posted on all of it, same as always, next Sunday right here at this same hour. That's the news for this week. Stick around, because we've got a brand new voice taking the turntable tonight, and the music program starts right after this. From the second floor above the furniture store, take care of each other, neighbors, and I'll see you Sunday. That's the week. This is Ray-Colton, WMPQ, Maple Falls. Good night.
Evening Evening, folks. Name's Walt-Denderby, and if my voice sounds a little new to you, that's because it is. First night I've had the whole turntable to myself, so bear with me. I figure there's no better way to break in a chair than to start with something that'll get your foot tapping. So here's the house orchestra kicking things off right. That's Maple Grove Polka by the WMPQ House Orchestra. And if your floorboards are still shaking, that's not the record player. That's just how they play it. Now we'll ease it back a touch. This next one's got a little smoke to it, perfect for whoever's still finishing up the supper dishes. Autumn Blues from the House Orchestra. I hear the fellow who wrote that one got the idea watching folks stare into a vending machine window, wondering if the pie was worth the nickel. Sticking with something lively. I understand our Legion boys have been giving this town plenty to cheer about, so here's a little something in their honor. Miller's Victory March, House Orchestra. If that doesn't get you up out of your chair, friend, I don't know what will. Here's a bright one next. Brass section really earns its keep on this record. Liberty Bell Fanfare, Rev 2 they call it. Seems the first take didn't have quite enough shine on it for the boys in the band. This one does. Now let's slow it down and let some voices carry it for a while. Rock of Ages Quartet, House Orchestra. There's something about four voices blending like that on a Sunday night that just settles a fella right down. Here's a quiet little piece I'm awfully fond of. Feels like it was written for a town about the size of ours. Overture for a Small Town. Every time I spin that one, I think of the square right outside this window, and I'd wager you do too. This next one's for anybody missing somebody tonight, and I expect that's a fair few of you. Wish you were here tonight from the House Orchestra. Hold that thought a minute and let's pick the tempo back up. That was County Line Hoedown. I hear the fiddle player on that one learned everything he knows at a barn dance 2 towns over, and it shows in the best way. Now here's one for the front porch crowd, rocking chairs and all. Grandpa's Porch Waltz House Orchestra. Slow and easy, just the way a summer evening ought to go. We're coming down the stretch now, so let's bring the whole chorus in on this next one. fiddle and folk chorus. That's about as full a sound as this little studio can hold, and I love it every time. One more before we close it out proper. Get your dancing shoes back on for this. Grange Hall Reel, House Orchestra. Name for the very building it was first played in, or so the story goes around here. That was Grange Hall Reel, the WMPQ House Orchestra, kicking up the dust one last time tonight. That's the music program for tonight, neighbors. It's been a real pleasure being the one to bring it to you. Get some rest, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night, Maple Falls.